we have some very positive ones. And if we look back to just a year and a half ago to Cyclone Cedar in Bangladesh, here was an example where the Red Cross there had been involved, the movement had been involved in helping to get tens of thousands of people ready to engage the community in evacuation at the time of notification of disaster. And so was that expensive? No. Was there preparation? Yes. And what was the result? Thousands of lives were saved because people were able to get their notification by people jumping on bicycles to go around communities and let people know that a risk was imminent and that they needed to evacuate. Simple things that we are not yet engaging in as communities in much of the world that can save lives. Certainly, as we look at the earthquake in Chile, and I'll speak to Haiti in a moment in the response discussion, but if we look to Chile, there's clearly an example where prevention, mitigation, preparedness gave to us a stark difference in the outcome as compared to the situation in Haiti. And what we do know, and I heard it at this conference last year, is $1 spent in preparedness saves $9 in response. So the economic investment is well worth it because it's not a matter of whether disasters are going to happen and we'll have to pay that price, but only when and where. And so in leaving the preparedness and mitigation discussion, I will just say two things. One, it is simple. Having you each have your go bag or having water in your home so you can take care of yourself is not a very complicated issue. And two, it's not a miracle. It doesn't happen because someone else has taken care of it. It happens by each of us engaging in the work or countries engaging in the work as Bangladesh has done. If we move now to response, so we're moving from the prepare and mitigate into response, and what are the lessons that I think we have learned and what can that teach us about what we can do in the future. And we look at what happens. The first is going back to the preparedness issue. When a major disaster happens, and I think this is particularly true as we heard of Dr. McGee's presentation, when they happen in urban areas, there is really only so much you can do to make up for a lack of preparedness. When the infrastructure is completely damaged, when the airports and the ports are closed, there is very little you can do to get water to people in those first 24 hours that hadn't been planned and placed in advance. It's just not humanly possible. And so we can talk about what we could have done and what we should have done, but what we should have done was been thinking about what we needed to do in advance. So then what are the issues in response? And certainly from our perspective, the first issue in response is to recognize that no governments, no NGOs are going to be sufficient to respond to such a crisis, and that the response is primarily going to be coming from the individuals in that community, and that we have to be open and honest about the realities that we need to engage our communities in their own response. The good thing about that is people naturally do that. Just as they may naturally be drawn to water, in every community that we see where disaster strikes, communities are naturally drawn to taking care of each other, and we need to support those initiatives and really build them into our cultures to allow us to take care of each other. Certainly from the Red Cross, as we are engaged in our response in Haiti, we don't need high amounts of security as we go around and do our work, whether it's food and water delivery or working on shelter problems, because we have very small teams of highly trained people engaged with the local community in being part of their own response and ultimately recovery. Our efforts are focused primarily at the beginning on all of the things related to water and health, so directly connected with the conversations today and certainly even this session. The first is water delivery and sanitation, and coming up with ways to do that that can be more efficient, more effective, and particularly in urban areas. As we saw that 57% climb of populations in urban areas, if we look back to tsunami, it was actually much easier to get water distributed in an area that had been completely wiped out than it actually is in an urban area in which the rubble is an obstacle to delivery and in which people have no place to go except to even less safe places. Less safe because as the rains come, the places they have moved to are the places that were not being occupied before because of their risk of water problems. So we focus on water delivery and next sanitation. And the other is basic health care. As much as we would like to say that we're not going to have health care problems, we know that without the prevention and the preparedness in advance, we now are in a rush of vaccinations and other health responses, because as the rains come, as time passes, as people are overcrowded, the health issues are going to mount, and particularly the waterborne health issues that we're going to see. And so that's really the focus, certainly, of our efforts and the efforts of other NGOs and government organizations. As we look to Haiti and its current situation, and another challenge and lesson learned is, as much as we knew that the problems we were going to have because of the lack of preparation before when a disaster strikes, what we're learning in an urban area such as Port-au-Prince is how much longer it takes to even get through the response period. The lack of sufficient latrines, the lack of sufficient vaccinations continue to be a problem. We've already vaccinated over 150,000 children, but we are not yet at our goal of 250,000. The challenges in delivering what's needed in a timely way are much greater in these urban situations where the infrastructure has been devastated. As we look to recovery, so we talked about preparedness and mitigation and then response, but what are the things that we see in recovery, and what are some of the lessons learned? And certainly as I think of recovery and lessons learned, I look to the tsunami area and 5 years later. And what we see is possible as part of recovery, again, if the communities, if governments, if the NGOs come together, is that we can return to an area that has been completely devastated and address water and sanitation issues in a sustainable way. We can bring water treatment capabilities, as our first presenter showed, that are appropriate for communities and their capabilities. There's no sense bringing a highly sophisticated water purification system into a community that a year later is not going to be able to maintain it. And what we see with tsunami, whether it's water sanitation systems that have been put in place, water purification systems, water delivery systems, and housing built in safe places so that they will not be overrun and have yet another health issue due to sanitation problems after a disaster. We can accomplish those goals, and we have accomplished many of them in the tsunami. So response needs to be followed by a recovery that builds in mitigation for the next disaster, not just returning things to the way they were before the last disaster. And I think the lessons we have not yet learned is exactly how do we do that in an urban response such as the Haitian earthquake. I'm thrilled that in this facility, not I guess only a few days ago, the commitments of organizations to bring almost $10 billion of support to the recovery efforts has been made, but I know, have a lot of lessons yet to be learned about how to properly invest those funds, not only in the immediate recovery, but again, in more permanent prevention, preparedness, and mitigation. So as I look to what we need to do, and I want to speak to that going forward in three parts.